Our bomber jacket sewing tutorial is finally here! If you have never made coats or blazers with lining, then this is a great sewing project to start with. It has a relaxed fit, there are no collars or pockets or any other difficult elements. What's cool about this sewing pattern is that you can make it in so many different materials. I'm so happy to partner up with newark.ai. It is a fashion design app, basically a very user-friendly website where you can upload your sketch or a flat drawing and ask AI to generate a pretty realistic image. In my case, I simply made a screenshot from our PDF sewing tutorials front page. I uploaded it in Newark and then I described in the text box many different materials in many different colors that came in my mind. There is also a slider where you can adjust the creativity level. My favorite ones are between 2 and 5. I did get too excited and made like hundreds of images, but I narrowed down to 8 options. I used them as my inspo pictures when I went fabric shopping. This is a great app to design clothes and find a lot of inspiration. For example, I knew that I would love to have my Soraya jacket in white tweed, but it never crossed my mind to add golden piping along the edges. I think it's such a small detail, but it's like a cherry on the top. I decided to go for the white option, partly because there weren't many fabrics to choose from, so I settled for textured cotton tweed. In case your fabric drapes very well, you can press on interfacing all over. In my case, I think this fabric holds the shape well enough, so I will not do it. Technically, you can skip it, but I also recommend to use lining. I prefer viscose linings, however, you can also go for polyester ones. The main thing is that it feels nice against your skin. You will also need interfacing for all the collar and cuffband details. You can skip it if your fabric already is quite stiff, for example, some heavy wools or maybe neoprene fabrics. You will need 6 buttons that are 2 to 2.5 centimeters in diameter. Matching threads, of course. This is only optional, but I got myself golden fabric that I will use to make piping to add some accent elements as it was in the AI-generated picture. And I totally agree that this white fabric might look too boring if I don't add some extra details. I will be using our Soraya bomber jacket sewing pattern, which you can find in our Etsy or online store. The links are down in the description. This pattern comes in A0 format, which you can print at a copy shop, and also in US letter A4 formats that you can print with a regular printer at your home or office. But then you will have to assemble it like I am doing here. Since I am using lining, I will use only sewing machine straight stitch. But if you are skipping the lining, then you will need to use either serger or sewing machine zigzag stitch to neaten the seam allowances. Make sure to follow this guide to know which pieces you need to cut from lining and interfacing as well. This information is also written on the pattern details. Take your fabric, fold it on half, and let's open the pattern layout guide in the illustrated tutorial. Of course, it is only a recommendation. You can place the details in a different order if you need to, but this might be useful at least for the start. This is so weird. When I was buying this fabric, it was written that it is 120 centimeters wide, and I even got extra fabric so I could squeeze in all the details. But turned out that it's 140 centimeters wide, so I didn't have to squeeze in the details and I could lay them normally. Yeah, that's my little rant. Don't forget that you need to cut this neckband detail twice. So in total there would be 4 front neckband details and 2 back neckband details. Remember to mark all the notches. I will use a marker that is air soluble, but you can also make small snips with the scissors, like 4 millimeters inside the seam allowance. I will also mark the middle points of the back panel as well as for the back neckband panels. You will need to cut only front, back and sleeve panels from the lining material. When it comes to main fabric, I strongly advise against cutting the panels in opposite directions. However, for lining, feel free to flip the sleeve panel by 180 degrees. Of course, you still have to follow the straight grain. And here as well, mark all the notches on the front panels and the sleeves. Also mark the middle points at the back panel. Last thing we need to cut is interfacing. Here as well you should follow the straight grain. Skip to the next chapter if you are not making piping. Here I will show how to prepare it. So my fabric is 65 centimeters long and I calculated that I need to cut 5 bias tapes that are 3 centimeters wide. I marked the lines and I cut them. You can also use pre-made piping tapes or you can buy those silky bias tapes that are already cut and use them instead. In my case, I couldn't find piping tape that was in a good looking gold color, so I opted out for buying this fabric. It does take a bit more work, but I think it will be worth it. Since my bias tapes aren't long enough, I have to stitch them together. I will cut the endings at 45-degree angle, lay the right sides facing and make a stitch 1 centimeter apart from the edge. This way the seam will be less noticeable. Press the seam open. Take a cord or you can also use a circular elastic band. The elasticity is not needed at all, but it has a nice strong shape compared to the silky cords. Place this cord or elastic band at the middle of the bias tape. Make a stitch, maybe not exactly right next to it, but more like 2 mm apart from the cord. I will change the regular sewing machine's foot to the zipper's foot, because then it will be way much easier to get close to the cord. Place the cord inside and stitch. I don't recommend to stitch very closely because the stitch then might stay visible if you don't stitch close enough when you will be sewing it inside the seam. This is the next chapter that everyone must follow. So we need to start by pressing on interfacing on the according details. Always check before which side has glue on it and place this side towards the fabric. My tip on pressing on the interfacing is to not slide the iron around. Instead, put it down and then put it up and then again put it down. Otherwise, you are risking that the interfacing might stretch around and stick to some parts that it shouldn't stick on. Lay the front neckband details with back neckband right sides facing. Pin the shoulder seams. Stitch 1 centimeter apart from the edge. Remember that we have 2 pairs of neckbands, so we need to do exact same steps again. A quick reminder to take out the pins before you are sewing, otherwise you are risking to damage the sewing machine and also breaking the needles. That's not a fun process. Take both cuff bands and fold them on half so the right sides are facing each other. Pin the side seams. The side seam is the shortest edge. Make a stitch 1 centimeter apart from the edge. Let's go to the ironing board and press all the seams we have just made. So press open the neckband seams. I am using this wooden plank to faster cool down the iron seams. When it comes to cuff bands, we also need to press the seams open. Just be careful not to press hard on the edges. Try to press only on the seam. Fold the cuff band so the right side is towards outside. Match the raw edges. Press the folded edge. We have already prepared nice and sharp cuff bands. While we are here, let's also prepare the waistband. So take one of the long edges, fold 1 cm and press. This step will help us a lot later when we will be attaching this waistband to the bomber jacket. I am pressing so weirdly backwards because the filming setup was in my way. Fold the waistband panel lengthwise with the right sides facing. You can flatten out the previously ironed edge and pin it flat, or you can pin down this edge being folded. Pin the shortest edges. Here is a close-up in case you didn't get what I meant previously about that folded edge. Stitch through all layers 1 cm apart from the edge. If you decided to flatten out the folded edge and stitch, it is also correct. To get nice and sharp corners, we should trim off some parts of the seam allowance. Cut it at an angle at corners, but be careful not to cut in the stitch. If you have a thick fabric like I do, take one layer of the seam allowance and cut off half of it. The idea is that if both edges of seam allowances are at the exact same point, then it looks very thick when you flip the edge from the inside out. When you shorten one layer of the seam allowance, then the longest layer kind of covers the shortest, and the corner is way less bulky. Flip the waistband from the inside out and press the shortest edges. I will show you only once how I am joining the piping, because I guess many of you will not use it. Lay the piping detail on the seam and match the raw edges. Make a stitch somewhere around 6 mm apart from the edge. This stitch is meant to keep the piping tape in the place. After you are done with the stitch, cut off the excessive part of the piping tape. Lay the front panels on the back panel with the right sides facing. Match the shoulder seams and pin. Make a stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. Or if you are also using piping, then stitch as close as possible to that cord. If you are not using piping, then stitch as you normally would, but in my case I'm still using zipper's foot, and I'm also using my nail to feel better where the cord is placed, and I try to stitch as close as possible. Press the shoulder seams open. I really like how the piping looks. I will also add it around the armholes. Take the sleeves and find the notches. The middle notch goes against the shoulder seam, and the front notch goes against the notch at the front panel. Normally we would stitch the side seam of the jacket and of the sleeve. Since the sleeve in this case is very low on the shoulder, we can stitch it as this was a t-shirt. Also, I really wanted to make this project as beginner-friendly as possible, that's why we are stitching the sleeves this way. Make a stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. I am still stitching with my zipper's foot because I have piping going inside there. The next step also is a rare exception. Since the sleeve is so low on our shoulders, we should keep it soft. It means that we should press the seam allowance towards the front and back panels. For classic blazers, it would be pressed towards the sleeve, and then you would have a sharp-looking sleeve. But this time, no, we need to press it on the opposite way. Lay the front and back panels with the right sides facing. Start by matching the armhole seams, then pin along the side seam. Stitch starting from the sleeve's hem up to the armhole and then down to the jacket's hem. Make the stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. Press these seams open. It is very convenient to use the small sleeve ironing board for this step, but don't be discouraged. You can iron on the normal ironing board, just try to press only the seam and not to press sharp edges on the sleeve. This step is like the main reason why I made this video tutorial. We need to join the neckband to the jacket and we need to join the edge that has no piping. Lay the neckband with the right sides facing and pin around. Match the shoulder seams and also match the middle point at the back. The front corner will be tricky since the neckband's corner is much smaller. That's why we need to make a cut inside the seam allowance of the neckband. This cut is around 7 mm deep, but do not cut deeper. This will help us to lay the neckband flat. Stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. Go very slow and patiently around those corners and make sure there are no creases when you stitch. Press the seam towards the neckband. Take your time and use all the edges of the ironing board to better access the neckband. If your lining is in a different color, then change your threads. Lay the front panels on the back panel with the right sides facing. Pin the shoulder seams. Stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. If your lining is very light and you cannot backstitch, you can leave long tails of the thread and tie knots at the beginning and the ending of the seam. Press the seams towards the back panel. By the way, a general rule of thumb for lining is to press the seam allowances together towards one side. Join the sleeves in the same way as we did for the main fabric. Find the notches, match them and pin. Stitch 1 cm apart. Press the top of the sleeve towards the front and back panels. Lay the front panel on the back panel with the right sides facing. As you can see, the steps are exactly the same as we did for the main fabric. Stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. Press the seam towards the back panel. The same way as we did for the main fabric, join the neckband to the lining. Here as well, make a cut in the seam allowance of the neckband in the corner. Stitch 1 cm apart from the edge. Be extra careful with those corners. Make a stitch by stitch, and I mean it literally. Make 1 or 2 stitches, then leave the presser foot, flatten out, and then continue stitching. Press the seam towards the lining. Lay the jacket so the right side is towards inside. Take the lining. Match the lining's right side with the jacket's right side. Pin around the neckband. Start by matching the shoulder seams. Then match the middle point at the back and also match the rounded corners at the front. Stitch 7 mm apart from the edge. If you stitch your lining with different colored threads, then it's time to change back to previous threads. Here the corners are much more easier to sew. However, be very careful to follow the edge so both corners would be in exactly the same shape. Trim off the seam allowances at the corners. Leave like 2 mm of the seam allowance and be very careful not to cut in the stitch. Here as well, I cut those corners each layer separately at different angles, so the edges wouldn't be at the exact same spot. If you have a thick fabric like I do, you can also trim off the seam allowances at the shoulder seams. Make small triangular cuts next to the stitches. This will help us to reduce the bulkiness when we will flip the jacket from the inside out. Make small cuts in the seam allowance around the curved neckline. This will help us to release the tension when we will flip the jacket. And here as well, if you have thick fabric, it is better to shorten one of the seam allowances. Flip the jacket to the right side as you would normally wear it. Press around the neckline and the opening edge. Use your fingers to push the seam of the rounded corners as close to the edge as possible. When you have got it in the shape you like, press it. Also make sure that the inside neckband isn't visible from the outside. You can even push it slightly towards the lining. Take all 4 of your sleeve hems, make gathering stitches around them. Set your sewing machine stitch to number 4 or even more if you can do it. Leave long tails of the threads and do not backstitch. The first stitch should be around 5 mm apart from the edge. Make another stitch around 8 mm apart from the edge. If you are extremely lazy, then yeah, it is possible to gather with one stitch, but then there's also higher risk that the thread will break when you will gather it. Also, I find much easier to join gathered details when there are 2 gathering stitches, because then the area is sort of more flat. I don't know if it makes sense. Take the cuff bands and match them with the main fabric's right side. Match the side seams. As you can see, the sleeve hem is quite a bit longer than the actual cuff bands, so we need to gather it. Pull the threads from the wrong side of the fabric. Make sure that the gathering is as even as possible. It is not meant to be crazily creased, but it is there so the sleeve would have this boxy shape. I will pin the cuff band side seam to the sleeve's side seam so I could better compare the lengths. Sorry, I realized that it is much easier to work from the wrong side, so the cuff band would be inside of the sleeve. So even out the gathering and pin around. Stitch all 3 layers together 1 cm apart from the edge. It is a bit difficult to get there because the sleeve is so narrow there, but take your time and make a few stitches, then rotate the sleeve and continue stitching. In my opinion, this is the most difficult part of the sewing project. We need to connect the lining to the sleeves. My trick to wrap my hand around this step is to place the lining in the sleeve as you would normally wear. Push the cuffband seam allowance towards the lining. Fold in the seam allowance as if this was already a finished jacket. Pin it with 1 or 2 pins. It doesn't have to be precise to the measurements. Now flip the lining so we can get to the seam allowance that is between the lining and the main fabric. Now it looks like a tube. Carefully take out the pin and repin it properly. The lining's raw edges are matching the raw edges of the cuffband. I honestly have no idea what's a better way how to pin it here, either vertically or horizontally. If this is something you are doing the first time in your life, I would actually recommend you to roughly hand stitch around instead of pinning. That could save you some sanity. And also gather lining's hems so the length would match the cuffband. Stitch 1 centimeter apart from the edge. Be very patient at this step. My trick is to make a few stitches, then I leave the sewing machine's needle in the fabric, I lift the presser foot, turn the fabric, then I put the presser foot down and make a few stitches again. And that's how I work all around this area. I will trim off some threads that are coming out of the fabric. Flip the jacket to the right side. Check the sleeves above the cuffbands. We don't want the gathering stitches to be visible. In theory, they should have stayed on the seam allowance, but I guess I have been a bit careless at some moments and there are some gathering stitches visible on the lining. I am using my pliers to take them out. We don't want the inside of the neckband to come out, so let's fix it into place. Lay it flat as it should look like and pin at the middle of the neckband. Go from the inside of the blazer and find the neckband seam allowance at the back middle area. Use a needle and a thread to secure inside and outside neckbands together with a few stitches. Make the stitch only on the seam allowances so it wouldn't be visible from the outside. Make 4 to 5 stitches in a single point. As you can see now, it is nicely fixed into place. We also need to do this step for the shoulder seams and the armholes. So find the seam allowances that are matching each other and make these 4 to 5 stitches through the seam allowances only, not through the main panels themselves. Check whether the length of the lining is matching the main fabric. Also look at the hems. Here we can see the point where my neckband is joined is uneven, so I will cut it straight. Pin together the bottom edge of the lining and the main fabric. Make sure that you are matching the side seams. make 2 gathering stitches along the lining's hem. If you are having an extremely thick fabric, you might want to gather these 2 layers separately, because it is difficult to gather thick fabrics, especially with an extra layer. Maybe even my fabric qualifies for that, but gathering them together saves a bit of time. Sorry, I made a mistake at the beginning of the stitch. You should not stitch on the neckband panels because we're not gathering that area. Make the first stitch around 5 mm apart from the edge and the second stitch 8 mm apart from the edge. I did mark my middle point at the back panel, but the marker has already disappeared, so I am folding together the side seams to find the middle back. Also fold the waistband on half to find the middle points if you haven't marked them already. Mark the flat edge and also the folded edge. Take the unfolded edge of the waistband. Lay its right side to the jacket's right side. Pin at this middle point. Gather the bottom edge until the length is exactly matching the waistband. Try to make the gathering as even as possible, so there wouldn't be parts that are flat and parts that are crazy gathered. Be careful not to break the gathering stitches at the side seams. Match the opening edge exactly with the waistband's edge. Stitch 1 cm apart from the edge, which is exactly next to that folded edge of the waistband. I am stitching from the side of the jacket because then I can better see the gathering and maybe even do some last moment touch-ups. Press the seam towards the waistband. Normally I would recommend to press from the wrong side of the fabric, but this way I can see and make sure that I'm pressing the waistband nice and sharp. This edge of the opening is so thick, so carefully trim off some of the seam allowances. Just be careful not to cut in any of the seams that we still need to use. Lay the folded edge of the waistband on the inside of the jacket in a way that it covers the previously made seam. Pin it, and I highly recommend to hand stitch. Unless you are a professional dressmaker, then maybe pins are enough, but I personally feel much safer at this point to do some rough hand stitches to keep everything together. Here you have 2 options. You can either do stitch in a ditch or sew on top of the waistband. I will go for the stitch in a ditch method and make a stitch right next to the waistband. This way the stitch will be barely visible because it kind of hides in the previously made seam. But if you want an easier option, feel free to stitch on top of the waistband, approximately 1 mm apart from the previous stitch. Our goal is to stitch the inner side of the waistband to the jacket. When doing the stitch in a ditch, I always get so stressed about the beginnings and endings of the waistband because it's quite thick there and I never can understand whether I am stitching on top of the lower layer or I am not. Here you can see that with my left hand I constantly use my nails to try to feel whether the inside layer of the waistband is there or not. While with my right hand I am slightly pulling the waistband away so I could get closer to the previously made seam. like the stitch and ditch method, but these corners are making me mad. If you have a trick how to deal with them, please write it in the comment section. Check if the waistband is fully stitched to the jacket. Sometimes it does happen that the stitch goes off, and then yes, you should redo the stitch, at least in that area. Take out the thread from hand stitching if you did it previously. Also check, maybe there are some threads hanging out from the gathering stitches, just cut them off. Lay the waistband on the ironing board and press the lower edge. Copy the placement of the buttonholes from the paper pattern to the jacket. Use a ruler to make sure that the buttonhole is exactly at the middle for the waistband and at the neckband. I will use the special buttonhole foot and my sewing machine setting for buttonholes. In theory, for jackets, blazers, coats, you should use keyhole buttonholes, but not every sewing machine has them. Mine does, but they somehow do not work, so I will stick to the regular ones, and from my experience they hold pretty well. Always try the buttonholes on a scrap fabric first. Unless you are having a huge experience with them and you are making them every single day, then you can skip this step. My first buttonhole was like 2 millimeters too long for my button, so it's good that I tried it out before making them on my jacket. I start cutting the buttonholes open with the seam ripper, and I finish cutting them with my scissors. I have seen some other methods how to cut them open, but I do have some reservations about it. Always make sure that you're not cutting in any of the stitches. Take your buttons and stitch them on the opposite side of the jacket. I usually place the button on top of the buttonhole and then on the opposite side of the jacket, and I try to see how it will look when it will be stitched on the jacket, and then I stitch on the button. Use the regular sewing needle and the thread and stitch them like 6 to 7 times to the jacket. Also, it is important to stitch through both layers of the neckband, so the neckband also would be more solid and fixed together. This is it, we have finished. Let me know in the comments what material you chose for your own bomber jacket. Please leave us a like if you enjoyed this tutorial and subscribe to our channel for more sewing and knitting tutorials. Bye!